The day my son got married without telling me began like any other, yet the heaviness in my chest told me something was wrong long before the truth found me. I was scrolling through my phone, mindlessly checking updates, when a tagged photo caught my eye. My son, my only child, dressed in a crisp suit, standing beneath an arch of white flowers. At his side stood a woman I had never met, wearing an elegant champagne-colored dress, her smile radiant. My heart didn't break instantly. It cracked slowly, piece by piece, as I read the caption congratulating them on their beautiful wedding. A wedding I hadn't even known was happening. A wedding I had not been invited to. And beneath the photo, in a comment thread I wished I had never opened, someone congratulated her, and she replied that only special people were invited. The words stung deeper than any wound life had ever given me. I sat there, trying to steady my breathing, replaying years of memories like a desperate attempt to remind myself that I had once been important. I thought of the nights I worked double shifts to give him everything I never had, the mornings I walked him to school holding his tiny hand, the afternoons spent cheering him on from the sidelines. I thought of the sacrifices, the silent prayers, the sleepless nights when he was sick. To realize that all of it, everything I had poured into him, was enough to earn me a place on the guest list, enough to be considered special, left me questioning whether I had ever truly known my son at all. As the shock settled into my bones, I tried to steady myself with logic. Perhaps there had been a mistake. Perhaps she had meant something else. But deep down, beneath all the layers of denial, I sensed something darker, something that had been building slowly over the years in subtle ways I had chosen to ignore. The glances, the small hesitations, the way she always seemed slightly uncomfortable around me. It wasn't until much later that I realized her discomfort wasn't random. It was rooted in something old, something ugly, something that still thrived in places you'd never expect. I remember the first and only time I met her. It was at a small cafe, where my son had insisted we meet. I had arrived early, eager and nervous, wanting to make the best impression. She walked in looking polished, her hair swept into a bun, a designer bag on her shoulder. She greeted me with a stiff smile, her eyes quickly scanning me from my skin tone to my clothes, as if quietly evaluating whether I belonged in her world. During that brief meeting, I felt her walls, high and impenetrable, as she asked polite questions but never once looked fully into my eyes. My son had brushed it off when I later mentioned it, saying I was being sensitive. I chose to believe him because mothers always want to believe the best about their children's choices. Over the months, their relationship deepened, but my place in my son's life slowly diminished. Invitations to dinners became less frequent, phone calls shorter, and visits rare. Every time I asked about her, his voice would take on a tone I didn't recognize, defensive, dismissive, almost protective of her in a way that made me feel like an intruder. I tried to accept it, convincing myself that he was simply building a life, that all children eventually drift a little as they grow. But now I saw the truth behind that distance, and it felt like a sharp blade twisting deeper with each breath. I stared at that wedding photo again, studying the faces of the guests. Smiling, laughing, embracing. Not one familiar. Not one belonging to the family that raised him. Not one belonging to the mother who sacrificed everything. My hands trembled as I zoomed in on the image of the bride. Her expression was almost triumphant, as if she had curated the perfect moment, the perfect event, the perfect world, one where I did not exist. Her words echoed loudly in my mind. Only special people were invited. For her, special meant something specific. It meant people who fit her vision. People who looked like her. People who would not make her uncomfortable in front of her friends. People who, simply put, were not me. In the days that followed, I sank into a silence heavier than grief. I went to work, cooked meals, cleaned the house, yet none of it felt real. My whole life I had believed that love was enough, that a parent's devotion could withstand anything. But this hurt in a way I had never been prepared for. Love, it seemed, didn't protect you from being excluded. Love didn't shield you from prejudice. Love didn't guarantee respect. I wondered if I had failed him, or if he had simply been too ashamed to stand up for the person who raised him. And then, darker thoughts crept in, thoughts I tried to push away but couldn't.
What had she told him about me?
What had she made him believe? One evening, after avoiding all my calls for days, he finally sent a message. A single line. A single excuse. He said they wanted a small, intimate wedding. But I'd seen the photos. Dozens of people. A large venue. Laughter spilling everywhere. A celebration so grand it made my stomach twist. There was nothing intimate about it. The lie felt worse than silence. I made myself go outside just to breathe. The world moved on, as if nothing had shifted. People walked dogs, children played in front yards, neighbors chatted casually. Yet inside me everything felt altered, hollowed out. The hurt wasn't just about a wedding. It was the realization that my son allowed someone else's judgment, prejudice even, to draw a line that excluded me entirely. I decided I needed closure. Not answers necessarily. The answers I feared would hurt me more, but closure for my own sanity. So I wrote him a letter. Not angry, not accusing, just honest. I told him I loved him. I told him I raised him to value respect, compassion, and loyalty. I told him I was proud of him, but also deeply hurt. And I told him something I never thought I'd have to say, that sometimes the people we love outgrow us, not because they become better, but because they forget where they came from. I left the letter on his doorstep at dusk, knowing he wouldn't open the door if I rang the bell. Days passed. Then a week. No response. Not a call, not a message. I realized that silence was his choice. His way of telling me where I stood. His way of telling me who, in his new life, counted as special. I wondered if he understood the damage that had been done, the trust that had been broken, the years of closeness that had vanished in a single day. But healing is a quiet process.
Slow.
Lonely. And it began the day I decided to stop refreshing his social media, stop waiting for an explanation, stop expecting an apology that would never come. I reminded myself that my worth was not tied to anyone's invitation list, not even my own son's. I reminded myself of the strength it took to raise him alone, the dignity I maintained even when disrespected, the love I gave without expectation. These were things no one could take from me. Over time, the pain dulled, not because it became less cruel, but because I grew stronger. And in that strength, I finally understood that sometimes life forces you to face the most heartbreaking truths so you can rediscover the power you forgot you had. I never stopped loving him, but I learned to love myself more, to give myself the grace I had always given others, to recognize that being excluded from his wedding said nothing about my value and everything about the choices he made. One evening, as I stood by the window watching the sunset paint the sky, I whispered a quiet hope that one day he would see what he had done, not to punish him, but to let him grow. Because wounds like these shape people. They teach lessons silence cannot. And if he ever came back, if he ever reached out, I would listen, but I would never forget. For now, I live with the truth. I was not invited because I was not considered special. Yet, in surviving the pain, rising from it, and finding strength in the ashes, I realized something far more important. I have always been special, with or without their acknowledgement. And maybe one day, he will open his eyes and see what he lost when he chose to stand beside someone who believed otherwise. Until then, I carry my dignity forward, knowing life has strange ways of revealing people's true hearts. And sometimes, the most painful revelations lead us back to ourselves, reminding us of our worth, our resilience, and our quiet, unshakable power.